Mia and Ellie coming to the rescue there. Okay, Numbers chapter 13 and 14, giant faith. Okay, giant faith. We'll see why that is as we get into it. Reconnaissance. There you go. If you were like, how do you spell Siri? How do you spell reconnaissance? And then it comes on all loud, R-E-C. And then report is the second main division. And then we will see the reprimand and the response. And reconnaissance mission, we're going to see that in just a moment. The report is going to take us from chapter 13 into chapter 14. And so we don't want to split that up. So that's why we're doing 2 chapters, and then the reprimand and response we will get to in a few minutes. But the first thing that we're going to see here in this first section, the reconnaissance mission, is that some men were called. Verse 1. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving. See, in God's mind, in his heart, it already belonged to the children of Israel. I'm giving it to them. Which I am giving to the children of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a leader among them. Now, it may be that we have some strong females in here who say, why didn't they pick some women to go? You need to remember that maybe many of you would be able-bodied women. You say, you know what, I can go spy out the land. I'm tough. I can take it. I don't mind getting my hands dirty or whatever. But just keep in mind that at that time, in that economy, in that group of people, it was the men who did those kinds of things. And so God is calling the men to go do those things, okay? So don't be angry, at least at me, okay? So he says in verse 2, you shall send a man, every one a leader. So you're going to pick the leaders. And in verse 3, so Moses sent them from the wilderness of Paran, according to the command of the Lord. All of the men who were heads of the children of Israel. So they sent their leaders. This is a quick, great point that's not the main point, but I'll point it out anyways. It's always best that if you're sending someone to go and serve the Lord or to represent you to go serve the Lord, choose the best. Don't go, where's that one guy that he doesn't do anything and we really don't want him around? Oh yeah, let's send him. We don't want to do that. What we want to do is we want to find those that are already serving, that are already busy, and we want to get them and send them to go and serve, especially in something like this. Now, let's look at these guys real quickly. We're going to read through verses 4 all the way down to verse 15 pretty quickly here. Verse 4, the first guy's name was Shammua. Okay? Shammua. In verse 5, Shaphat. Okay? Then in verse 6, Caleb. In verse 7, Igal. I like that name, Igal. Verse 8, there's this guy named Hoshea. Okay? His name, Moses, we're going to be told here that Moses is going to call him Joshua. Okay? But here in verse 8, Hoshea. Verse 9, this guy named Palti. Verse 10, Gadiel. Verse 11, Gadi. Okay, verse 12, Amiel. Verse 13, Sether. Verse 14, Nabi. Verse 15, a guy named Goel. And then in verse 16, these are the names of the men whom Moses sent to spy out the land. And Moses called Hoshea the son of Nun. That does not mean that his mom was a nun. Okay, that was his dad's name, Nun or Nun. Moses called him Joshua. Now, the next thing that happens is after these men are called, they get these marching orders. Okay, we're sending you. Here's what we want you to do. Verse 17. Then Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan. And he said to them, go up this way into the south and go up to the mountains. So he gives them some direction. And see what the land is like, whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak, few or many, whether the land they dwell in is good or bad, whether the cities they inhabit are like camps or strongholds, whether the land is rich or poor, and whether there are forests there or not. Be of good courage, and bring some of the fruit of the land. Now the time was the season of the first ripe grapes. So they're given some specifics there. This is what I want you to go do. Now, in a sense, it really doesn't matter what the land looks like, what the people are like, what the houses are like, what the fruit's like. In a sense, it doesn't matter because God has already given them the land. It's not like they can go, well, we don't really like this land, Lord. We want this other land over here. God had already given it to them, and God had already told them about the land. Does anybody remember the description that God gave about the land? That it was a land flowing with
milk and honey.
Milk and honey. Milk and honey. How many of you like milk? Milk. Yes. Love milk. Especially chocolate milk or strawberry milk. But I also love honey. How many of you love honey? Yes. Did somebody say, man, honey is biblical, man. Okay?
Cheerios.
Honey. So it's a land flowing with milk and honey. What does that mean? Milk comes from animals, different kinds of animals, but animals. And then honey comes from bees, yes. So the idea was that there was lots of milk and honey. The idea, what God was saying was, everything that you need is there. Everything that you need and more is in that land. But they're sending out these spies to go double check God, I suppose. Let's make sure this guy, God really told us the truth here. Okay? So that's what they're going for. Now, in verses 21 through 25, we see that their mission was accomplished. So they went up and spied out the land from the wilderness of Zin as far as Rehob, near the entrance of Hamath. Everybody knows where that is, right? Yeah, me either. Verse 22. And they went up through the south and came to Hebron, Ahiman, Sheshai, and Talmai. The descendants of Anak were there. It tells us, it gives us a kind of a timeline or how old it was, I guess. Now, Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. Right? You guys know about Zoan, right? Me either. Okay, verse 23. Then they came to the valley of Eshcol. And there, now check this out, they cut down a branch with one cluster of grapes. They carried it in between two of them on a pole. They also brought some of the pomegranates and figs. Pomegranates I'm not crazy about. Figs I'm crazy about. Okay? Honey, figs, biblical things like that. Okay? But I want you to take note that this cluster of grapes was so large. Now, it doesn't necessarily say that the grapes themselves, like, super big grapes. That may have been the case. But the idea is that the cluster of grapes, the bunch of grapes, was so big that they had to tie it, fasten it to a pole, and carry it in between two guys. That's a lot of grapes, man. Right? All of us have seen vineyards. You might even have some vines at your house, or maybe you've seen some neighbors growing grapes. And you get a good bunch, or if you go to the store and buy your grapes and they're all pumped with all kinds of drugs and stuff, and you can get a nice big bunch of grapes. But this is big enough that they had to fasten it to a pole. It's not like one guy could just carry it. So you're getting the picture here that this land, man, what God told us. I mean, He was not playing around. Verse 24. The place was called the Valley of Eshcol. Eshcol actually means cluster. They just called it cluster because of the cluster which the men of Israel cut down there. And they returned from spying out the land after 40 days. So this was not just an overnight thing, like, go check it out real quick, come right back. This is 40 days of spying out the land. So they got a really good look at the land. Okay? But now, here comes the report. Now again, our minds are saying chapter 13 and 14, it's one chapter, it's one story. You'll notice, for those of you that are taking notes, we're going to start in verse 26 right here of chapter 13. That's going to take us all the way into chapter 14, verse 10. So it's quite an extensive report. But this is where the story turns here. Okay? Verse 26, what do we see here? Verses 26 and 27. The report says the land is fruitful. God was telling the truth. Imagine that. Verse 26. Now they departed, they left Canaan, and came back to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of the children of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. And here's what they said in verse 27. Then they told him and said, we went to the land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Man, they bring back a great report. The land is fruitful. God was not lying when he said that it was a land flowing with milk and honey. In fact, they use his words. It truly flows with milk and honey. This is the fruit. Sounds good, doesn't it? Look at the next word in the next verse. Nevertheless. That's like saying it looks really, really great. Oh, this land is beautiful. Look at this fruit. But, or you hear, like you can hear someone talking and then you're thinking to yourself, and sometimes you'll hear somebody say this, it sounds really good. I hear a but coming. Because you're saying, it's really this and it's really that and it's really that. And that's what they were doing here. And beginning at verse 28 on down through the remainder of the chapter, verse 33, it was all about being fearful. The report turned fearful. Why? Let's find out. Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. And let's find out. The Amalekites, in verse 29, dwell in the land of the south. The Hittites, Jebusites, the Amorites are in the mountains. The Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the banks of the Jordan. Verse 30, then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it. Now, I am way too excited to not tell you this, and we'll move on with our story in just a moment, but Caleb later on, Caleb will not enter the land for 40 years. We'll find out why. But from this point, 40 years later, so you think Caleb, we don't know how old he is here, but 40 years later, he must have been pretty old. And yet Caleb, he said, listen, they were 40 years later, they're still saying, well, there's people and it's scary. And Caleb says, hey, give me the mountain. I'll take the mountain. I'll go charge up there and I'll defeat whoever's there. He's an old guy, but he's feisty still 40 years from now. So here, this is just a taste of who Caleb is. As this report is being given. Now, I've already told you, there's 12 guys that went. 10 of them are saying the land is great, except the people there are scary. That's really what it came down to. And as they're beginning to share their scary story, Caleb says, hey, everybody be quiet, I have something to say. And this is what he says. He says, let's go now and take possession. We're well able to overcome it. Let's go now. Let's just go right now. Yes, the people are there. Yes, the descendants of Anak are there. But we can take them. Let's go. I like this guy. We're going to find out that Joshua was with him also. He's on his side. Like, yeah, let's go. This is a man here, Caleb, and we get just a little glimpse. This is a man with giant faith. Now, how is it that I can go from a small faith to a big faith? How do I go from being fearful to being faithful? Well, we get a little glimpse here, and we'll find out some more later. But notice that Caleb says, let's go now. In other words, Caleb believes God. God had said, I'm going to give you the land. Caleb says, he's giving us the land. Let's go. What are we waiting for? Everybody else is saying, but there are people there, and they're scary. Yeah? And? Let's go now. So Caleb has this giant faith. Verse 31, but the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people whom we saw in it are men of great stature. What? Verse 33, there we saw the giants. The word is Nephilim. People go crazy with that. Nephilim. They're like the space aliens, right? They came from outer space, or Satan sent them, and they mingled with regular human beings, and there's like these superhuman. They get all crazy with this stuff. Listen, these were large people. How large were they? I do not know. Are they still in existence? Because I heard that somebody saw giants way out in the wilderness in the desert of Arabia, living out there in the sand dunes or something. I don't know. All I know is what's here. Verse 33, there we saw the giants. The word is Nephilim, and it tells us the descendants of Anak came from the giants. Now, what is a giant? What's a giant? A giant, for me, is anybody taller than me. I'm short, right? Giant. Maybe so. Maybe the fellas. Okay? They're all taller than me. Maybe they're giants. I do not know exactly what these guys meant, but the people that they saw there were of great stature. They were taller, bigger than these Israelites that were going in. And they point out the descendants of Anak came from the giants. There's giant people there. And we were like grasshoppers. Look at this in verse 33. We were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. They had convinced themselves that they were nothing compared to the people in the land. They were filled with fear. Absolutely filled with fear. These guys, these 10 guys, had a giant faith also. Their faith was in the giants. They had no faith in God. See, God had told them, it's a land flowing with milk and honey. I've given it to you already. It's yours. You just got to go in and take possession is all. And rather than trusting God, they trusted the giants. They believed that God could not protect them against these giants. This story that we're going through, I mean, you start way back in Genesis and you keep going in Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy. What you'll find as you're looking at the story, you take a step back and you look at the whole thing. It's real simple. This is a story of faith. And we see it very clearly here. We have a large group of men, the leaders, who have no faith. They're fearful. And then we have 2 guys. Right now, we're only told about Caleb, but it was Joshua also, as we'll see in a few minutes. You have the 2 guys, the minority, who were filled with faith. One was filled with fear. One was filled with faith. One had a giant faith in God. One had a faith in the giants. Where do we want to be? Which side do you and I want to be on? Where do we want to land on? What do we want to be known for? What do we want to trust God for? Do we want to trust God for much or for little? I think that all of us, if we were to go around the room, and maybe if we were to do it privately, I think the results would be the same. I think that all of us would say, you know what, I really want to have a giant faith. I really want to have this faith that I just want to trust God no matter what. But that's what we struggle with, right? That's what we struggle with. We oftentimes trust other people rather than God. And so we become fearful. We want to say something. We want to speak up. We want to make our stand for Christ. But we're afraid of the rejection. We find ourselves fearful rather than faithful. How do we go from one to the other? How do I let go of my fear, and how do I trust God more? Well, that's one of the things that we're finding out here. But as we can see, these guys were filled with fear. Now, we're going into chapter 14. Track with me, please. Verse 1. Okay? They're still fearful. So if you're taking notes, we're still in the fearful section there. This is what fear does. Verse 1. So all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried, and the people wept that night. What fear so often does is it brings about crying. They were so afraid. These people were so afraid that they spent the night crying. They were filled with fear. You see, what had happened was the 10 that came back gave their bad report, their fear-filled report. And what happened? It was like wildfire. Everybody caught it. Even people who did not see for themselves were afraid of something that they had not seen. Isn't that crazy? But don't we do the same thing? We do the same thing. We can become so afraid of things that we've never even seen. We don't even know if they exist or not. Right? Go out to take, mom says, hey, I need you to take the trash out. I've told you this, I've used this illustration before. Mom says, I need you to take the trash out in your butt. It's dark outside. So what? The trash stinks. Get it out of here. Told you to take it out earlier. You didn't take it out? Take it out. But you know that you take that trash out, and then, sometimes what you'll try to do, you take the trash out, and then you'll put it right outside by the sliding door. I'll get it in the morning. No. Take it to the trash can. What's your problem? I'm afraid. Of what? Of whatever monster is alive out there by the trash can, right? Because it's dark out there. When you go around the side of the house, it's dark. And you don't know what's out there. Something's going to eat you or snatch you or whatever. And you're so afraid. You're afraid of something that you have not seen. Something that you're imagining is out there. And eventually you work up the courage. Maybe you take your dog with you, or you convince your little brother or little sister, like, hey, let's go look at the moon real quick. Come on. And then you go out to look at the moon, and you throw the trash in and go, okay, I'm done. Let's go inside, or whatever, But you're so filled with fear. And that happens so easily. So easily. That's what's going on here. The 10 come back with this fear-filled report, and they infect everybody else. So the fear turned into crying, and then it also, as is so often the case, turns into complaining. Verse 2. And all the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation said to them, if only we had died in the land of Egypt. Take note of this. Here's the next thing they say. Or if only we had died in this wilderness. I'll give you a little hint. Be careful what you ask for. Verse 3. Here's what they ask. Why has the Lord... See, they complained against Moses. They complained against Aaron. Now they're complaining against the Lord. Why has the Lord brought us to this land? To fall by the sword. That our wives and our children should become victims. Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt? Now, help me out here real quick, Fusion. God had told them that the land was flowing with what? Milk and honey. God had already told them, it's the promised land. I'm sending you there. It's yours. That's where I'm taking you to. But they have completely forgotten the promises of God. You ever done that before? You ever done that before? Like, that there's a promise there in the Word that says, I'll never leave you nor forsake you. But you freak out anyways. You forget all about that. The fear sets in and the faith goes bye-bye. Why does that happen? Why does that happen to us? They were so overcome by fear that they were rejecting now the promises of God. Listen, the Lord has brought us to this land to kill us by the sword. Our wives and our children will become victims. It would have been better for us to just return to Egypt. In fact, in verse 2, they said it'd be better for us to if only we had died in the land of Egypt. It would have been better for us to just die in Egypt. Verse 4. Here they go again. So they said to one another, let us select a leader and return to Egypt. We tried that before. Remember that? Anybody remember that? They said, hey, we need, our Moses is gone. We need a leader. We need a God. And they made their own golden calf and started worshiping it. And then they got in trouble for that. Well, here they go again. We need a different leader. Someone to take us back to Egypt. Here's the response of Moses and Aaron, verse 5. They fell on their faces before all the assembly of the congregation of the children of Israel. Moses and Aaron, the leaders, were so overcome that they just fall down in front of everybody. And we don't know exactly why. Maybe they're begging God for mercy. Maybe they're just saying, hey, please, guys, what are you doing? But look at this. The report goes from fruitful to fearful, but then it takes a turn to faithful. Look at this, verse 6. It's quick. Look at this. But Joshua, the son of Nun, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, just two of them, tore their clothes. It's a sign of frustration or humiliation. And here's their report. Verse 7, they tell them that it's a good land. And they spoke to all the congregation of the children of Israel. They speak up and they said, the land we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. Also, in verses 8 and 9, the report is, God is with us. If the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into the land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only, do not rebel against the Lord, nor fear the people of the land, for they, I love this, for they are our bread. In our modern vernacular, we would say, piece of cake. The people, piece of cake. He says, the people are our bread. We're going to devour these people. Their protection has departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. And in these verses, we see the secret of not living in fear, but living in faith. In these verses, we see the secret of not having faith in the giants, but rather having a giant faith in God. What is the secret? The secret is found in verse 7 and then verses 8 and 9. But the first one is that it's a good land. In other words, remembering God's promises. Remembering God's word. Remembering what God said. You see, that's the first step to having a strong faith. Is to remember what God said. Remember what God promised. Remember what God told you. And secondly, to remember that God is with you. It's real simple. It's real simple. And you go, well, that's too simple. I need eight difficult steps. No, you don't. What you need to change your fear into faith is two things. Number one is to remember God's promises. God said the land's good. They said that it's a good land. It's an exceedingly good land. What God said is true. What God told us is true. And secondly, God is with us. I love that in verse 9. For they are our bread. Their protection has departed from them. And the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. So you may have a friend or maybe a family member, maybe a parent. And they just seem to always have they've always got this giant faith. They always just trust the Lord, and you're just like, drives you crazy. Like, how do they do that? Why can't I do that? And they trust the Lord, and maybe they lead you there, and then afterwards, after the situation passes, you realize they were right. They trusted God, and they were right. And I was filled with fear, and I'm so frustrated with myself. And you just go, man, how do you do that? Ask them. And what you'll find out is that it's probably something real similar to this. Well, I believe what God said, and I know that God is with us. That's it. I need some more steps. Give me some more things to do. Give me some beads to rub on while I pray, or send me on some journey, where I have to go fight dragons or something, and then I'll get the gift of courage or the prize of strong faith. No, this is it. This is what Joshua and Caleb, this is why they had a strong faith. It's because they knew that what God had said was true, verse 7, and they knew that God was with them, verses 8 and 9. In verse 10 it says, and all the congregation Here's their response. Said to stone them with stones. We're going to kill them. We're going to kill them for having faith. Isn't that crazy? We are going to kill them. Because they believed God, we're going to kill them. And it's mob mentality. Everybody's in on it. Like everybody, it says in verse 10, and all the congregation said, everybody is against them. And yet they hold fast. How did Joshua and Caleb hold fast? Because they knew what God had said. And they are actually, we're going to see it, they will be rewarded for their faith. Here's the third main division. It's the reprimand, verses 11 through 38. And we see here in verse 11 that Moses begins to pray for the people. Then the Lord said to Moses, I love these exchanges that God and Moses have throughout the story. Then the Lord said to Moses, how long will these people reject me? And how long will they not believe me? With all the signs which I have performed among them. Look at this, verse 12. I will strike them with the pestilence and disinherit them. And I will make of you a nation greater and mightier than they. Moses, I'm just going to wipe them all out, and then I'll start over with you, Moses. You and your Ethiopian wife, man, I'll make you just a great nation. Now, if you and I were Moses, we would have said, yeah, I agree. These people complain too much. You know, let's get rid of them, God. Let's start over. Is that what Moses does? Verse 13, and Moses said to the Lord, then the Egyptians will hear it. For by your might, you brought these people up from among them. And they will tell it to the inhabitants of this land. They have heard that you, Lord, are among these people. That you, Lord, are seen face to face. And your cloud stands above them. And you go before them in a pillar of cloud by day and in a pillar of fire by night. Now, if you kill these people as one man, then the nations which have heard of your fame will speak. And they will say, verse 16, because the Lord was not able to bring this people to the land which he swore to give them. Therefore he killed them in the wilderness. So Moses is now talking to God and reasoning with God. Now listen, God, if you kill these people, the Egyptians are going to hear about it, and they're going to badmouth you. And then they're going to tell the people in the land of Canaan what you did. So you don't want to do that. You brought these people out. You saved them. You want your fame to spread, God? Don't kill the people. And verse 17, and now Moses, still Moses, he says, and now I pray, let the power of my Lord be great, just as you have spoken, saying, this is what God had said, the Lord is long-suffering and abundant in mercy. I love it. Moses is reminding God, hey, here's what you say. You're long-suffering, abundant in mercy, forgiving iniquity and transgression. You see that? This is God in the Old Testament. Sometimes people will say to you, oh, I really prefer the New Testament because, God is so loving in the New Testament, but in the Old Testament, man, he was a killer. He was so, just mean in the Old Testament. Really? Verse 18, he's long-suffering, he's abundant in mercy, he forgives iniquity and transgression. I love that. However, verse 18, but he by no means clears the guilty, visiting the iniquity, the sin of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation. Pardon the iniquity of this people, I pray, according to the greatness of your mercy, just as you have forgiven this people from Egypt until now. That's Moses' prayer. God, pardon these people. Have mercy on these people. I know they're whining. I know they want to kill Joshua and Caleb. I know they're ready to run back to Egypt. I know they're wishing for death, but please, God, pardon them. Have mercy on them. So what does God do? Verse 20, then the Lord said, I have pardoned according to your word, in answer to prayer. Moses intercedes, that means he prays on behalf of the people. God listens and forgives. However, verses 21, or beginning at verse 21, there is the punishing. You go, wait a minute, I thought they were pardoned. Well, yeah, God didn't kill them. However, there were still consequences to their disobedience. And that's a biblical principle. I don't know if you're aware of this, but there are those times when God will forgive us for something, but there are still consequences for what we have done. And you go, well, that's not really, I thought, well, yeah, God didn't judge you, but there are still consequences. It says in verse 21, but truly as I live, all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord. Because all these men who have seen my glory, and the signs which I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, and have put me to the test now these 10 times, and have not heeded my voice, they certainly shall not see the land which I swore to their fathers, nor shall any of those who rejected me see it. Now, here's the consequences. In punishing the people, the first thing is, they were denied entry into the promised land. That's what he's saying right here. He's saying none of these people are going to get to go into the promised land. Because of their lack of faith, they would not enter God's rest. Now, real quickly, again, sometimes people get a wrong view on this. The promised land is not a picture of heaven. Okay? It's not a picture of heaven and the people are working hard and trying to get to heaven. That's not it at all. These are already God's people. They already belong to him. The land of Canaan, the promised land, is a picture of God's rest. And when we, by faith, when we live by faith, when we trust God, the result is we rest. See that? When we trust God, we rest. For these people, because of their lack of faith, real simple point, because of their lack of faith, they were denied entry into the promised land. In other words, because they had no faith, they would never have any rest. It's not that they were not God's people anymore. They were still God's people, but they would never experience rest. Do you remember what the Bible says about anxiousness? What we're supposed to do with it? Anybody remember? Be anxious for nothing, but in all things by prayer and, anybody remember? Supplication. Let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, yes, which surpasses understanding, will what? Will do what?
Guard your hearts and minds.
Yes, will guard your hearts and minds. In other words, when I take my anxiousness to God by faith, the peace of God rules in my heart. The rest, I experience rest. This is simply a story of faith. That's what God is showing us here. This is how the life of faith works. I trust God, I have his peace. I do not trust God, I won't rest. Have you noticed that? That when your faith is small, family, have you noticed that? That when your faith is small, that you're always anxious, always fearful, always, man, I'm having a hard time going to sleep because I'm thinking about this too much and I'm afraid and I'm scared. But when we trust God, the fear flees. And we experience God's peace, his rest. These people, because of the lack of faith, they're just finding out they're not going to enter the land. However, verse 24, look at this. But my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit in him and has followed me fully. In other words, he trusted me. I will bring into the land, and where he went, I will bring into the land where he went, and his descendants shall inherit it. In other words, Caleb has gone into the land. God says, he's going to enter the land. I'm going to let him in. Verse 25, now the Amalekites and the Canaanites dwell in the valley. Tomorrow turn and move out into the wilderness by the way of the Red Sea. In other words, you're not going in. You're going to turn around and you're going to go back. What happened here? Come on. There we are. Sorry, verse 26. We got to move right along. They were destined to die in the wilderness. No, God wasn't going to kill them right then and there, but they would die in the wilderness. And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, how long shall I bear with this evil congregation who complain against me? I have heard the complaints which the children of Israel make against me. Say to them, tell them this, as I live, says the Lord, just as you have spoken in my hearing, so I will do to you. Remember what they said? Did God just bring us out here into the wilderness to die? God says, that's what you asked for, that's what you're going to get. Verse 29, the carcasses of you who have complained against me shall fall in the wilderness. All of you who were numbered, according to your entire number, from 20 years old and above. So what he's just told me is anybody at this point, anybody that's 20 years old at this point and older, they're going to die over the next 40 years in the wilderness. And what God's going to do is he's going to take the younger generation into the promised land. You're like, yeah, that's right. I knew that we knew better than our parents, right? I told you, Mom and Dad, I know better than you do, right? Let's see what he says. Verse 30, except for Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, the son of Nun, you shall by no means enter the land, which I swore I would make you dwell in. But your little ones, whom you said would be victims, I will bring in, and they shall know the land which you have despised. But as for you, your carcasses shall fall in the wilderness, and your sons shall be shepherds in the wilderness 40 years, and bear the brunt of your infidelity. In other words, the younger ones, the sons, were going to have to suffer because of their parents. They would get their chance to go into the promised land, but in the meantime, it would be a hard life, moving from place to place and place, never settling down, until your carcasses are consumed in the wilderness. According to the number of the days in which you spied out the land, 40 days, for each day you shall bear your guilt 1 year, namely 40 years, and you shall know my rejection. I, the Lord, have spoken this. I will surely do to all this evil congregation who are gathered against me, who are gathered together against me. In this wilderness they shall be consumed, and there they shall die. Gosh, there's still so much left. I'm sorry. Let me read through this real quickly. Verse 36 and 37, let me just put this up. They would die. They died by the plague. Now the men whom Moses sent to spy out the land, who returned and made all the congregation complain against him for bringing a bad report of the land, those very men, the 10, who brought the evil report about the land, died by the plague before the Lord. But Joshua and Caleb survived. And finally, the response in verse 39 on down is one thing. It's this failed attempt to enter the land. And I can summarize it for you real quickly. There's a group of them who say this. They say, listen, we really blew it, Moses, and we're just going to gather up and we're going to go up to the mountain. We're going to enter the land. And Moses says, no. Don't do that. Verse 41, why do you transgress the command of the Lord? In other words, God already commanded you. Turn around, get out of here. But now they're disobeying God again. And what they failed to do by faith, they are attempting to do in the flesh. But the flesh can never accomplish the life of faith. We cannot just work it up and say, you know what, I'm just going to, I messed up the first time, some missed opportunity, but man, I'm just going to just get it back and I'm just going to do my own thing. Lord, go ahead and just stay over there and I'll just do my own thing. And in fact, Moses says, don't go up because the Lord's not with you anymore. Don't go up there. You're going to get killed. And we're told that the people go up, but Moses didn't go, neither did the Ark of the Covenant. The presence of God did not go with them. And so this group rushed in. And they were chased away by the inhabitants. God was no longer with them in the land. What they attempted to do in the flesh, or they attempted to do something in the flesh rather than by faith. They should have just lived by faith in the first place. It's a hard lesson for us. That sometimes missed opportunities are just that. We'll never get those opportunities back. There are times when God will give us another shot, give us another chance. But those are few and far between. The opportunity comes, we run at it by faith. I heard a story years ago about a pastor. He was not a pastor yet. He's a young man, and he was at the beach sitting in this pizza place, and God was impressing on his heart, like, go over and talk to that guy at the next table over. But he was arguing with the Lord, like, I can't go over there. I don't know the guy. And it's going to seem really weird if I go and talk to him. And while he's busy arguing with the Lord, this guy walks in off the street, walks straight over to that guy at the table, sits down, and begins to share the gospel with that guy. And this pastor, who was a young man then, learned a hard lesson. If I can't use you, I will use somebody else. We don't want to miss those opportunities because we were filled with fear. We want to take hold of those opportunities by faith that God gives to us. We got to remember his promises and remember that he's with us. Father, thank you so much.